Hi, I'm Alistair McIntyre of Electric Scotland. I thought I'd do a wee video newsletter because I haven't done one for a long time, and I thought maybe it'd be nice to chat about what's going on the website. We're trialing a new system with a company called the Zoic out of California. It's a kind of startup company, but its aim is to take what they say are like venerable old sites like ours, and in the background present them as a kind of new and up-to-date site, so that mobile, smartphones, tablets and so forth can actually see our site much better than our default that we actually put up. Because after all, I mean, the site is, 18 years old now or something like that, and we are a bit constrained because of the software we use on how we can present it. So apparently Zoic will quite literally try hundreds of different templates until they find ones that seem to match the likes of people that are using mobile devices. And obviously we have an issue with advertising, because we use Google AdSense to serve up adverts on our site, and sometimes the way we present them isn't very useful for people that use smartphones. So their idea is that they will take, they'll still present advertising, but it will be more kind to the particular user that's using a smartphone to actually view the site. So that's what we're trialing with them. They believe if we do the job right, we can get a lot more visitors to our site, and we can also improve our advertising revenue. So both of these goals are obviously very desirable for us. But because it's under beta test at the moment, there's obviously issues. And we did have one issue where we redirected our DNS to them and then suddenly found that no one could get to the site. And as we'd just been hacked at that particular time, we were rather focused on being hacked again. But as eventually, after about 4 days of really hard work and long hours, we eventually discovered it was the DNS redirect that was wrong. So we weren't best pleased with that, because I think we didn't get that much sleep over these 4 days, I can tell you. There's obviously going to be the odd other issue that we'll probably have, because it is a beta test, so we're prepared to live with a little bit of hassle until we get it right, and if it just doesn't work, we'll just simply revert to our old style again. But worth a go, I would say, worth a go. Now, what's happening on the site? Basically, we continue to add a lot of content every week. This week we're continuing on books that we've been posting up, because as you know, I tend to take a new book and then I add a chapter a day until we complete the book. That's partly because there's a lot of weekly magazines out there who also serialize books. And also we did get a lot of complaints at one time that we were putting simply too much up, that people simply didn't have the time to read it. So this was our kind of response, in that we would take a book and put a chapter up every day. So if you suddenly found we were putting up, you think, oh, I really want to read that, then at least you can read a chapter a day along with us until the book's complete. And if you really want to read the whole book in a one-er, just wait until we post up the last chapter, then you can read the whole thing. We're doing at the moment the history of Thomas Dick, who's a geologist and botanist. He's in Caithness, and we actually finished one previous to that about another naturalist. And it's funny, the commonality between both of them is that neither of them have any money. To me that's fascinating, because money today is important for everyone. No one wants to wait till they save up for something. They just get it now by credit card, we'll pay up for it and so forth. Didn't have these options back then. If you wanted something, you had to save up for it, end of story. But I'm just amazed at how poor both of these people were, and yet the extraordinary work that they produced. I mean, they were leaders in their field. And so by reading it, I feel you can't but be encouraged that if they can do something like that with their small and tiny means, what might you be able to do? So, you know, I think these are encouraging stories. And I've always believed that putting biographies of people up, prominent people that have done important things, we can learn so much from them. I mean, I often think people like Bill Gates and people like that just think money's the answer. But in actual fact, it's really not. I mean, if you were to read the stories about most of the biographies that we're putting up, a lot of them had a very tough time at school. But at the end of the day, they obviously got a lot hammered into them one way or another. And they came out of it, seemingly, very well indeed, and went on to make their mark in the world in a very big and important way. So by reading these, you can sometimes learn other things. I mean, for example, education, which I say Bill Gates thinks the answer is money. If you look at the schools that a lot of them are brought up to, I mean, they carried peat and coals just to warm the wee schoolhouse. Yes, they were disciplined, but if you think about schools today that are not disciplined, I mean, it doesn't give you the conditions to learn in, because if you look like you're studying hard, you're called a swot and bullied and so forth. But in those schools, the cane and the tawse was readily available, and it was used, so that meant you had to really pay attention. And there was no messing around in class, you just had to learn. And that's at the end of the day what we all need to do, we need to learn. So, you know, there is something to be said for the old and tougher and basic ways, but one-room schools, having to take coal and peat there just to warm it in the winter, that shows you the school conditions were not good. But even schools that some people talk about today, which are a lot better than that, they still say are unacceptable. We need more money spent. Well, I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is just better schooling and better discipline at school is the real answer to people learning more. So by reading these biographies, you can often learn things from them, not just as far as education goes, but these people often shared information generously with kids and with their work colleagues and so forth, and in the academic world. They gave us their time and knowledge freely. Today we seem to be obsessed with copyright. If you go to our universities, yes, they'll share information with you as a potential graduate, but no, they won't share any information outside of university, because they'll say, well, have you not got some money for us? You know, I mean, I think we've got it wrong today somehow or other. And I don't really think the pace of change has changed much. We seem to be good at refining things, but not really coming up with any just huge, breaking, new discoveries. And again, I wonder if that's the way we're being educated is the problem for that. So anyway, these are some of the things you can learn. I'm also still been working quite hard on the Scotland's Future section of the site, so more information goes up there all the time. I mean, at the moment I'm focusing on the work of the Scotland UN Committee, which the vast majority of people have never heard of. And yet it was through their work that Scotland actually got devolution. And I mean, Labour and the SNP and all that will claim it was their work. But if you actually read those papers, you'll see that's just a load of rubbish. It wasn't them at all. It was the work of the Scotland UN Committee and a very small group of people that really knew how to work global politics that got us devolution at the end of the day. And I certainly think it's well worth reading those papers that are now going up on the site. I mean, some of them are really seeing the light for the first time in the public domain. But one of the members of that committee, Dr. James Wilkie, has been gradually tidying things up and sending me copies of these, and he's going to be sending more as he gets the time. But as well as continuing to work on that, I will say that I've been trying to find information that might help people decide on which way to vote. I'm very conscious, because I now live in Canada, that I don't have a vote. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not sure. All I do know is I spent a lot of my life living in Scotland, running a business in Scotland, going to school in Scotland, and yet I don't get a vote because I'm not resident there any longer. I'm not convinced that's right, because I can trace back as far as I've gone. I'm all Scots on both sides of the family, way back. So I don't get a vote. But a guy from, say, Pakistan that happens to be resident in Scotland now gets a vote. I don't know that that's necessarily right, and I don't know what the Scots diaspora think about that, but however, that's the fact, and that's how it's going to go. But I have been trying to, say, put some information up that you can learn from. One of the concerns I have is that I don't really think Scotland's ready for the global market as an international or an independent country in the world. I mean, they just don't seem to realise that global institutions are actually now more important than countries. So things like that concern me when I hear the SNP saying we're going to join the EU, and the discussion is, will it be easy or will it be hard to get into the EU? Instead, I think the discussion should have been about, should we go into the EU in the first place? Because at the end of the day, we will have to apply to get in, whether we're got inside straight or not. But to not go into the EU, we simply need to decline to apply to join. I mean, why aren't we talking more about EFTA and the EEA? Because when you join the EU, that means we give up certain of our independent rights as a country. Like, we can no longer sit at the table of the World Trade Organization, which is the most important trade organization in the world. By far. I mean, a lot of the legislation coming out of the EU is a result of decisions made by the World Trade Organization. So the fact that Nicola Sturgeon can stand up and say, oh, it's so obvious we should be a member of the EU. Well, no, we're not even going to have a referendum on that. We're going to go in. End of story. I just think something like that is absolutely wrong in my view. And so that concerns me. But as I say, I'll leave it to the Scots that get a vote to make a decision about independence, and we'll see where that leads us. If we vote yes, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And if we vote no, it'll also be interesting to see what happens. But then we're working on other histories as I work my way kind of through. I've been doing a lot of research recently on the Picts, because there's still some imponderables about where the Picts came from and so forth. And I've been having interesting discussions with Gary, I think it's Giannotti from America, because he started off researching the Great Seals of the United States. And because he's been researching it in the background, he's actually ended up going all the way back before Christ, as it were, and back to the times of Egypt, and even beyond that. And I've been kind of saying to him, have you looked at the major archaeological dig in Orkney? Because that settlement apparently goes back some 5,000 years, because they have been able to do some carbon dating. That's about, I think, 3,000 years before Stonehenge or something like that. I have, as it happens on the site, we've got a section for Orkney on the site, and on there I do have a half-hour video about that archaeological dig, and if you haven't seen it, you really should. It's just mind-blowing, it really is. I'm continuing to work on the Electric Canadian site as I get a chance. It's not a high focus with me, but because I'm in Canada and I'm a new immigrant to Canada, I figured it was time I did a little bit of work on that. So I've been working on that, I think coming up for 3 years now on the Electric Canadian site. And as I found information that I think is useful, I've just been posting it up. And again, I'm doing stories there. At the moment, I've got stories from the backwoods of Duck Lake. And they're actually quite gentle stories, and I think kids would love to read them. Even young kids would enjoy reading them, and I believe adults will enjoy them as well. But I've just done a book about one of the native Indian tribes in BC and some of their folklore and so what goes up. So I'm continuing to work on that, but not to a very high extent, because my main focus is still on Electric Scotland, which it should be, because after all has always been my main interest. But when it comes to Electric Scotland, I've been working for a while now on that book by Thomas Dick Lauder, the one about Lochendhu. It was a 3-volume book, and it was way popular in his day. It's a little bit old-fashioned, of course, because you can't read a book that old. It isn't old-fashioned. But I wanted to kind of show what a very popular, big publication novel was like back in those days. And so that's why I chose the book on Lochendhu. We're on the 3rd and final volume now. And there's usually 16 chapters in each, and we're currently on chapter 10, so another 3 weeks and we'll have that book finished. I then propose to do more publications by Thomas Dick Lauder, and they're quite large, several volumes, but this time they're on the histories and the folklore of Scotland, and I think they contribute a lot to our understanding of the old days in Scotland, so I'm really looking forward to bringing you those in the weeks ahead. We've also just been working on a biography on Alan Cunningham. You might say again, this is a poet, but again he was born under lowly circumstances and was educated under those disadvantages that many other Scots have had. And again, it's this rising to the top from very low beginnings. There seems to be a great story of the Scots. Under diversity, we seem to do even better than most other nations of the world. I also discovered some years ago the 2 volumes of the Northern Highlands in the 19th century. And I always thought that was just a 2-volume set. But as chance happened, some weeks ago now, I suddenly discovered there was a 3rd volume added to that. So each week I've been putting up another year. I mean, the current year in this one is 1855. And he starts off by giving an overview of what things are like in the United Kingdom, in Britain, Great Britain. And then he goes on to give you a synopsis from the Inverness Courier of all the stories that he's reading through them. And there's some real gems in there. And from those, I've been able to pick up other stories. I mean, for example, I've read now about 2 accounts of ordinary Scottish soldiers that wrote books about their time in the army. One of them served mainly in India and Afghanistan, and tells in quite deep detail about their life there. And that's quite fascinating. The other soldier was mainly in the European and South African campaigns, and also in the Zulu Wars. And again, that's pretty fascinating, because that's a whole different area of the world that he fought in. So I put one of these books up last week, and there's the other one's gone up this week. So I hope you'll enjoy reading those ones. I've also been doing the book by Henry, I don't quite know how to spell his surname, it's Dyerre, so Dreyer, I don't know. He's classed as a compositor, poet, journalist and musician, but he's been writing about the Worthies in his local area of Scotland, and I personally have thoroughly enjoyed reading them. These are real characters in the area, and well, I don't know, I just love these kind of stories, and I kind of hope that none of them are very large, and so they can be read quite easily at the lunch break or something like that when you're just grabbing a sandwich or something at work. You can read a whole story quite easily at lunch. So I'm hoping you're enjoying these. We're usually putting 2 or 3 up every week. So we've also done a focus on the songs of Scotland and poets and poetry in Scotland, 2 completely different publications, but again the concept here is both of them we're trying to give you a really good overview of how songs and poetry and the poets have progressed over the years in Scotland. So it gives you a bit of a history and the development of that part of our culture. And again, we've been putting chunks up every week of these, so that maybe if you've got the time you can read some. I also discovered the book of the Old Edinburgh Club. And again, there are some parts in there that are really interesting. I've managed to find the first 12 volumes that they produced. And, I mean, for example, if I read you what I just put up for this week, for example, they're talking about the old toll booth, and they're giving you extracts from the original records. Then there's one about Shelley arrives in Edinburgh, and there's an article about him. Then there's one on the antecedents of the College of Justice, and then there's another one on the Tailors' Hall and the Cowgate. So by reading through them, you're getting some of the history of the trades in Edinburgh as well. We continue to put up copies of the Enigma Machine. Remember, this is one that Doug Ross, who's a sorry, he's a Scot-Canadian, and obviously lives in Canada now. But he came up with this idea as a kind of antidote to crossword puzzles. One of the nice things about the Enigma Machine is those few that are in our Electric Scotland community. I'm enjoying them because Hugh is putting up one a week, and then the few in there that are getting involved are saying, I think the answer to 6 and 9 are that, you know. And Hugh will come back and say, yep, you're spot on. Or he might say, no, you kind of missed that one, and occasionally gives you a wee clue. So during that particular week, the few people that are working in there are aiming to actually get everything right by the end of the week, and then he will post up the final results and the final answers to the whole one at the end of each week, and then he starts the next one. So, you know, if you want to get involved in that, you need to join the community so you can participate and read the clues that he gives you. But again, I think if you like crossword puzzles, it's likely you'll enjoy this. So it's worthwhile having a wee look. We're also serialising the book on the Great Floods of August in 1829. And again, this was a book by Sir Thomas Dick Lauder, but he wrote in great detail about the catastrophe of those floods. They were just horrendous, and it was huge destruction. So he's telling you stories of these floods, stories of heroism, about people being saved at the risk of life and limb, you know, from the floods, and some of the extensive damage they did to property and so forth, and the way the whole course of the river changed as a result of these floods. They were just huge and unprecedented floods. So we're getting a really good account of them, and again I find it very interesting. And we've just completed the history of the Old Scots Church of Freehold. This is a church in America where the Presbyterians built their first church. And so that's quite a neat historic book. This was back in 1685. So that's pretty early in time of the Scots going to America. So again, if you're interested in the old history of how the Scots did in America, that's going to make a good read. We've also just started on the new book on the home life of Sir David Brewster. He's classed as a Scottish physicist, a mathematician, an astronomer, an inventor, a writer, historian of science, and a university principal. So he's obviously quite a character. But this is about his home life, which is mostly in the borders of Scotland, written by his sister. So again, it's quite interesting looking at a famous personage from a home life standpoint rather than his work standpoint. So again, I think you might find that interesting. We've also put up, I'd say, a couple of new papers in the Scotland UN Committee. We put the memorandum to the Council of Europe, and we've also put up the petition they raised to the Queen in Great Britain. Part of the reason for the petition to the Queen was that they had to demonstrate they tried everything, and because no one was responding, then the international United Nations had to do something about it, because all other avenues had produced nothing. So the petition to the Queen, while they didn't expect an answer, and in fact didn't get an answer, was the final proof that they had absolutely tried everything to get a devolved government in Scotland. So I think it's well worth having a wee read of that. We've also, I mentioned about that Highlanders book, about how I discovered there was a third volume. Well, one of the other books that we've got on the site was a calendar of documents relating to Scotland. But we've got volumes 2, 3, 4 and 5 in the appendix, but we never ever could find volume 1. But now we've found it at long last, so we're now starting to put that up on the site. So again, for researchers, there's some real gems in these documents, and so we're delighted to bring you that final volume in that set. And again, reading some of the books on the Highlands, I saw a reference to the songs of Mary MacLeod. She wrote in the Gaelic language. But because of that, I did a search to see if I could find anything. And John Henderson helped a lot with this. And basically, we were able to find a little book of her Gaelic songs. The nice thing was there was a preface and an introduction about her, which is in the English language. And when they give you her Gaelic songs, they've also given us an English translation. So you get both the Gaelic and the English in this book. So we've made that available on the site as well this week. I've been looking also at old copies of the North British Review. And in that, this week, I discovered a very good article about Dr. Brown. Again, he's a Presbyterian minister, but some of the things he achieved were pretty amazing. And another Brown was the one that wrote the Dictionary of the Bible. So all in all, I mean, there's a good cross-section that goes up each week. And I have, for example, found things about, like one of the things that's actually very difficult to find is about the practice of dyeing. This is colour dyes. Like, we knew that Scotland used colour dyes in their clothing, but how did they dye the products? And you know, trying to find that information out is extremely hard. And so it's very, very rare that any information comes up about that. And of course, we've just discovered a new source of information. And again, I've added that to the website. So it's these little bits of information. Because I remember one organisation in Norway wrote to me to say they just found out about how to dye cloth with nettles, and they said, we're going to try that at our university and see how it gets on, and we'll let you know what happens. In fact, they did, and I did add to that particular section some of the reports that they sent me back. But it goes to show people all over the world are interested in new ways of dyeing cloth and so forth, and some of the old Scottish ways and plants that were used to help the dyeing process is actually very useful. And as usual in my newsletter of late, I've been going to the Book of Scottish Anecdote and picking out wee stories from there just to finish the newsletter off. And one of the ones that I put up this time around is about Scotch washing. And in it says, I shall take notice of one thing more, which is commonly to be seen by the sides of the river, and that is young women with their coats tucked up, stamping in tugs upon linen by way of washing. And this not only in summer, but in the hardest frosty weather, when their legs and feet are almost literally as red as blood with the cold, and often two of these wenches stamp in one tub, supporting themselves by the arms thrown over each other's shoulders. And I noted that actually many years ago I put up a book about Campbell, who went to he went to Canada to see how his Scottish brethren were getting on settling there. This was back in the 1670s, 80s, way back in Canada. And in that book I remember reading of the snow starting to come down as he was entering a wee Scottish village in Canada. And that was exactly the scene that welcomed him, and he was so struck with it he commented about it in his book. So it shows they took that method of washing to Canada with them. So there's a whole mixture of stuff going on really there. So anyway, that's what you're going to read in this current week's newsletter. I hope you enjoy it when you get it, and remember that we have it available both in our community, but we also have it as available as a PDF file that we make available each week. So if you go to look at the main menu and it says newsletters, click on that, and that week's edition will always be there for you to download and have a read. But if you're in the community, you can read it there as well. So there you go. Hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have, let me know, and maybe I can do these wee video ones on a more regular basis in future. Okay, nice to talk to you again. Take care and have a great weekend when it comes. Goodbye.